Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. We're live in Israel bringing you the biggest headlines from the region. It's currently 2 p.m. here in Israel and 7 a.m. in New York. I'm Sivan Raviv, and today is day 702 of the war in Gaza. Let's get into all the top headlines at this hour. As a reminder that Hamas is not yet defeated, the terrorists managed to fire 2 rockets from Gaza toward Israeli border towns. One was intercepted by air defense and the other fell harmlessly in an open area. Over the weekend, after warning, IDF airstrikes took down 2 high-rise towers that served for Hamas terror. The IDF intensified airstrikes in and around Gaza City, and for the first time since the early stages of the war, it hit high-rise buildings in Gaza City's Tel Al-Hawa neighborhood, less than an hour after publishing urgent evacuation orders for people in and near that building and around Gaza City structure to be evacuated. The Al-Susi building was being used by Hamas as operational infrastructure, including underground facilities beneath the towers, were utilized to plan attacks, stage ambushes against IDF forces, and provide escape routes for operatives. The army reiterated calls for city residents to flee to the new humanitarian zone in the Al-Mawasi area in the south. Amid an intensified Israeli operation to take over the city, the area has been equipped with field hospitals, water pipelines, and desalination facilities, and is set to receive a continuous supply of food, tents, medicine, and medical equipment. In the coming days, the IDF plans to continue carrying out precise strikes against Hamas terrorist infrastructure in Gaza City. Let's hear the IDF spokesperson on this.
כיום אנחנו אוחזים ב-40% משטח העיר עזה. הפעולה תמשיך להתרחב ולהתעצם בימים הקרובים. חמאס יפגוש בעיר עזה את כוחות צה"ל במלוא עוצמתם. נגביר את הלחץ על חמאס עד להכרעתו. נמשיך לרדוף אותם בכל מקום.
And joining me now is our ILTV editor-in-chief, Steve Leibowitz. Hi, Steve. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, Yvonne. Just before you ask me the first question, just to mention to our viewers that at this hour, there are 3 Houthi drones flying over the Sinai area. The IDF air defense is keeping track of them, but if we end up having to shelter, you'll know why. Go ahead.
We'll let our viewers know if we need to take a break here and take cover. But in the meantime, Steve, can you elaborate on why the IDF has taken down these 2 high-rise buildings in Gaza?
Well, I mean, I would say 2 basic reasons. It's an observation point. Gaza is basically flat. The only thing that's high are the remaining towers, the remaining high buildings, and Hamas uses them to spot our activities, to place cameras and so on. So it was a natural thing that had to be taken down. It was infrastructure, used as infrastructure. They had offices apparently underneath the building where they operated from. And I would say that there's a second reason. It's kind of the psychological reason. Many thousands of Gazans saw those buildings coming down. It gives them yet another warning to leave Gaza City, to flee to the south to save their own lives. The IDF is coming. The Gaza City operation is starting to move, and they better get out while they still can.
So I guess that's my next question. We know the IDF sends evacuation notices ahead of time, and where is the population meant to evacuate to? Can you elaborate on this? And are large numbers of Palestinians moving south yet?
Well, it depends on what you mean large. We're saying thousands. Thousands sounds like a lot, but as far as I understand it, we're talking about 10,000, probably more than 10,000, but not into the hundreds of thousands, and certainly not a million that we're hoping will evacuate. We want them to go towards the Al-Mawasi area. There's been a humanitarian zone set up there with medical facilities, with ample food, with tents, with all that's needed in order to house the evacuating residents if they choose to go. When I say choose, I mean Hamas is going to try to actively, and is trying to actively convince them not to go or to physically stop them from going. Many of them are expressing, let's say, ideological reasons that they don't want to go, or feeling that they've already moved during the war more than once, and they don't want to move again, and they'll take their chances. But Israel is doing efforts in order to prevent civilian casualty and quite frankly, in order to make the job that much easier for the IDF, because if it's filled with civilian population, it will be very, very slow going. And if the civilian population leaves and all that's left is Hamas fighters, then we know who we're fighting.
Now, is Israel signaling Hamas here that there's more coming their way if they don't surrender and give up the hostages?
Oh, we're signaling. I think President Trump is signaling. He's saying that they're deep into negotiations with Hamas on the one hand. On the other hand, you know, if Hamas doesn't accept the deal, that a new set of proposals that Israel's putting on the table that are essentially for Hamas to surrender its arms and its governance, then it will be very, very, very bad days for Hamas. But Trump is also signaling that there are talks going on with Hamas. So there's that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we'll get into that in a bit. Thank you very much, Steve Leibowitz, in the meantime. Meanwhile, over the weekend, intense anti-terror operations were conducted by the IDF and the Shin Bet in Judea and Samaria, leading to the arrest of some 70 wanted Palestinians. The counter-terrorism raids in northern Samaria detained 25 suspects, seized 13 rifles, 4 pistols, and a Carlo-style submachine gun, and destroyed several explosive devices. Another pistol was confiscated in the Hebron area. According to the IDF, a senior Hamas operative preparing an improvised explosive device attack against Israeli civilians was arrested in the town of Saida. Separately, soldiers from the paratrooper brigade's reconnaissance unit detained several additional suspects and neutralized an IED. Dozens more Palestinians accused of involvement in terror were held during large-scale raids in Silwad and Ein Yabrud, northeast of Ramallah, and Hizma, in the northern part of East Jerusalem in Israel. The IDF says its forces seized weapons and incitement materials. Separately, IDF troops eliminated a terrorist near Burin after he threw a suspicious object at troops at a checkpoint and ignored orders. There were no injuries of IDF soldiers. President Donald Trump says that his administration is in very deep talks with Hamas. Asked by a reporter about the status of the mediated hostage negotiations between Israel and Hamas, Trump warned it's going to be nasty if all captives are not released. Trump gave no details of the talks, but reports said U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff met in Paris with Qatari officials on Thursday to discuss efforts to reach a ceasefire and hostage release deal in Gaza. About the Israeli plan to conquer Gaza City, Trump said it's Israel's choice, but it's going to be nasty. During the Oval Office comments, Trump also said that some of the Israeli hostages may have recently died. Let's take a listen to Trump.
We're in very deep negotiation with Hamas. We said, let them all out right now, let them all out, and much better things will happen for them. But if you don't let them all out, it's going to be a tough situation. It's going to be nasty. That's my opinion. Israel's choice, but that's my opinion. They got to let them out. You got 20 plus you have about 38 dead people. Young, beautiful, dead people. And I'll tell you, the parents want them every bit as much, almost more, than as if their son or daughter were alive. But you have many dead people that are coming out as part of the deal. It's 20 people, but I think of the 20, there could be some that have recently died.
Trump's comments on the status of the living hostages followed up on similar remarks he made last month when he caused distress among hostage families by suggesting that fewer than 20 hostages remained alive. According to official Israeli numbers, 48 hostages remain in captivity, 26 of whom have been declared dead. Authorities have expressed grave concern about the lives of 2 others. The hostage families and supporters staged protests over the weekend in Jerusalem at the center. Freed hostages called on the government to return to the negotiating table rather than expand the war nearly 2 years after Hamas abducted 251 people from Gaza on its October 7th attack. Let's listen to Idit Ohel, mother of Alon Ohel, who is still held hostage by Hamas in Gaza.
It was very hard for me to see the video. I was very emotional. It was the first time I saw my son since the 7th of October 2023. I saw him. I do see that he is injured. We talked to many medical doctors, eye doctors. After they saw the video, we know that Alon is injured in his right eye, that he can't see it. as well as he is blinded in that eye. And our word, I want to see Alon. I want to hug him. Just as like just as this picture. I want to hug him again and make sure that he's safe. That he's safe in this country. And I miss him. I just want to see him.
In other news, the Lebanese military will begin implementing its plan to disarm the Iran-backed Hezbollah terror group. According to an announcement by the information minister, the government has now confirmed the plan. The statement included the cautionary note that the Lebanese army will begin implementing the Hezbollah disarmament plan in accordance with the available capabilities, which are limited in terms of logistics, material, and human resources. According to the minister, the cabinet decided to keep the details of the army's plan secret. Hezbollah and its allies object to the disarmament plan, and all 5 Shi'ite ministers walked out of the cabinet session as soon as Lebanese army commander Rodolphe Haikal entered to present the details. Calls for Hezbollah's disarmament have taken center stage in Lebanon since the terror group sustained heavy losses in a year-long conflict with Israel. The results of that war, which was paused last November, upended a power balance that had long been dominated by the Shiite Muslim group. This year, Lebanese President Joseph Aoun, under pressure from the United States, has pushed for the terror group to disarm. Israel has said it would withdraw from sites in Lebanon that its troops still occupy if Hezbollah lays down its weapons. But Hezbollah has so far rejected any move to dismantle its arsenal. Let's take a listen.
الجيش اللبناني سيباشر بتنفيذ الخطة لكن وفق الإمكانات المتاحة اللي هي إمكانات لوجستية ومادية وبشرية محدودة بالنهاية. فرحب مجلس وزراء بالخطة التي وضعتها قيادة الجيش ومراحلها المتتالية لضمان تطبيق قرار بسط سلطة الدولة بقواتها الذاتية حصرا وحصر السياح بيد السلطات الشرعية.
And joining me now to discuss the current events is Tom Gross, Middle East expert and international affairs commentator. Thank you, Tom, for joining. Hi. I want to discuss, Tom, the latest turn of events where it comes to Hamas and a potential hostage deal. President Trump said the U.S. is in very deep talks, that's how he called it, with Hamas. We're hearing of some name dropping of people who might be involved in the back channel. Is it plausible that direct negotiations are underway behind the scenes? What could Trump have in mind here?
Well, sometimes Donald Trump says things that are inexact, or he's sort of taken liberties with language. I expect they are using intermediaries, Qatari intermediaries. I doubt very much that US officials are directly in touch with Hamas. If they are, I think it's very unwise of him to admit it. It's like saying we negotiate with terrorists. It will give carte blanche for other terrorist groups in future to say the US should deal with us directly. So I suspect they're using Qatari intermediaries. But I have to say, Qatar is exactly the people they should be talking to, and they should be pressuring, because Qatar are the people who can deliver Hamas if they want to. We saw it with the Israeli-American hostage Idan Alexander, who was released unconditionally when Trump visited Qatar in May. Hamas released him. So in other words, if the Qataris tell Hamas to release someone, they will. And if the pressure should be put on Qatar by the United States, and I doubt that it is being put enough.
Now, Trump also said it would get nasty, those are his words, if hostages are not released. And we've heard this kind of rhetoric before, these kind of threats. How do you interpret that statement? Is it a bluff? Is it a warning? Does he even have leverage here?
I regret to say that I think he's, it's a bit of a paper tiger. He's also made similar threats against Putin and done nothing afterwards. What does he mean? I mean, Israel is taking very decisive action as we speak against Hamas in Gaza City and elsewhere. The only way he could get nasty or do something more decisive, going back to what I said about Qatar and also Egypt, is to not take a $400 million gift in the form of a flying palatial airplane from the Qatari regime, but properly threaten Qatar. Qatar can deliver Hamas. Or he can also threaten another supposed US ally, Egypt, to let Palestinian civilians seek refuge temporarily over the border in Sinai, it will be much easier for Israel to get nasty, to use Trump's words, with Hamas if Israel can fight Hamas without having hundreds of thousands of civilians in the way being used as human shields by Hamas. Israel can't get as nasty as it would like against Hamas because Israel doesn't want those civilians to die in large numbers.
How has Israel not pressured or discussed this with the U.S. until now? How has it not happened until now that the U.S. will pressure Qatar and Egypt to get involved, but that kind of involved?
Well, I spoke to some senior Israeli national security and intelligence figures early on in the war, and I said, why aren't you encouraging the then Biden administration to pressure Egypt to let civilians get off the battlefield? In every other conflict, civilians are allowed to get out of the way. In Ukraine, within days of the Russian invasion, about 7 or 8 million Ukrainians went to Poland, Hungary, and other countries, even though Ukraine is big and large parts of Ukraine were in fact safe. In the Syrian war, 3 or 4 million Syrian civilians sought refuge in Turkey, 1 million in Jordan, 500,000 in Lebanon, another million in Germany and Sweden and elsewhere. This is the only conflict where, in a way, the West claims that it cares about Palestinian lives, but it's forcing Palestinian civilians to remain on the battlefield. Now, you could say that we don't know who are civilians or who in Hamas, but at the very least, they should allow children or old people or women or sick people to seek temporary refuge in Egypt. It would be quite easy. Qatar, mentioning them again, built a lot of prefabricated homes for the World Cup 2 years ago. They have about 1 million housing units that they could airlift to the Sinai across the border. It's not such a big deal for people from Gaza to move temporarily to Sinai. It's the same language, same climate, same food. It's not like a Syrian moving to Sweden, for example. Anyway, so the Israeli military officials told me that, oh, they don't want to upset the Egyptian government. They don't want to upset Sisi. But I'm like, what is this? You are asking to make the war in Gaza almost impossible for Israel. As we've seen, the IDF has been very, very decisive when it comes to fighting the Iranian nuclear threat, Hezbollah in Lebanon and so on. It is bogged down in Gaza precisely because it cannot. No army can fight a battle, try and avoid civilian casualties when the enemy is enmeshed inside civilian infrastructure. So it's an impossible situation. It also leads to terrible international media coverage and reputational damage to Israel because it's viewed wrongly as a war on Palestinian civilians. It's not a war on civilians, but that's how the world sees it. Because in, I don't know, Ukraine again, a lot of Ukrainian civilians are not living on the front line. They moved out of the front line. So it's ridiculous. And I think it's a huge strategic mistake of Israel and of the United States, both of Biden and of Trump, to not seriously pressure Egypt. They have space in the Sinai. No one's saying Gazans go and live in Cairo, but they can build temporary shelters in the Sinai for civilians to take refuge in.
They should take you as an advisor to suggest these things exactly. Now back to Israel and Hamas. Can the U.S. realistically pressure both Israel and Hamas towards a deal? And are we looking at a partial deal like before, in your opinion, for some of the hostages? Or as Netanyahu has said before, it's now an all or nothing kind of deal?
Well, I think the Israeli government's in an almost impossible situation. On the one hand, every single hostage that can be rescued, that can be got out, every hour, every day, their extra is hell. And Israel should not say no to getting a hostage out one day earlier than they might do otherwise. On the other hand, these partial deals play into Hamas' hands. They're a kind of allow Hamas to prolong the war and extend everything. And what is this? You know, Israel is much stronger than Hamas militarily. Hamas can't beat Israel militarily. So what they do is they play on Israeli public opinion and Western public opinion by you know, these propaganda videos of hostages in poor health, looking emaciated and so on. They encourage, in a way, the anti-government demonstrators in Israel, and they put Israel in a bind because Israel needs to defeat Hamas. Prolonging the war is not good for anyone. Yes, maybe through a deal, which, by the way, the partial deal will only let one hostage per week out over, in other words, over 60 days, 10 hostages. So it will prolong it out in a lot of ceremonies. And it's amazing that at this stage in the war, Hamas thinks it can still, impose the conditions on Israel. It should be holding up the white flag and asking to sail into peaceful exile in Doha or in Sudan or wherever.
Now, when Trump speaks, we just heard him moments ago, his statements suggest that he's supportive for Israel to do what it's got to do when it comes to entering Gaza City and pressing Hamas. Are there external pressures on Israel to do this?
I think Trump wants the conflict to finish as soon as possible. Why do I say that? Because I think he very much wants to move on with the Abraham Accords. I think Saudi Arabia and a bunch of other Arab countries are ready to sign normalization agreements with Israel soon. I think that there's a timetable because you have the American midterms next year. You also have Israeli elections at the latest a year from now, but more likely sooner. It will be very difficult for Saudi Arabia and others to sign agreements without a proper government in place in Israel, or if the Republicans lose full control of Congress, there will be all kinds of delays. So if I was the Saudis and I was Trump, I would be looking at a ceremony on the White House to get Trump his much vaunted Nobel Prize and to get Saudis and others various things that Trump may have promised them. I'd be looking at that ceremony at the latest by next March or April. So if you work backwards with that timetable, the war in Gaza needs to wrap up quite soon in order to reach that timetable. So I believe Trump is telling Netanyahu, we want this over in weeks. The problem is easier said than done. You can't beat Hamas quicker than you can beat them unless you want to risk far greater civilian casualties than we've seen to date. Contrary to a lot of the propaganda we see in the Western media and from various Western diplomats and the UN, I want to make absolutely clear that there is no genocide. I, as someone who was a long-time human rights activist, will be the first to call it a genocide, were it a genocide. It's absolutely not a genocide. Israel has not tried to kill civilians. It's taken extraordinary measures to avoid doing so. However, in order to wrap it up quickly, Israel would need to take the gloves off, and then civilians would die in larger numbers, not in the kind of fake, phony, larger Hamas numbers that have been put out by the UN and various Western media.
Now, let's talk about the hostages. The hostage families were certainly distressed by Trump's suggestion that only a few hostages are still left alive and that some have died. And just this weekend, additional hostage videos were released by Hamas. What do you make of these videos? What is Hamas trying to achieve by releasing the hostage videos? It's clearly psychological terror, isn't it?
Yes, it's psychological terror. They're probably trying to say, look, we still exist. We've got cards to play. We've got your living hostages. It's a reminder to people there are hostages alive. They also, as you mentioned, 2 rockets were fired from Gaza earlier this morning, I believe by Islamic Jihad. It's amazing that 2 years on, they're still able to fire rockets from Gaza into Israel. It's a reminder they're not defeated. They're also playing with the nerves of the Israeli public. Of course, all our hearts go out to the hostage families, and it's quite understandable why they're desperate and they demonstrate. However, a lot of these demonstrations, unfortunately, play into Hamas's hands, and they give Hamas hope. Hamas know they can't beat the IDF militarily, but they can get Israel to declare a ceasefire, which is in effect an end of war, and therefore in effect a withdrawal and surrender by Israel, leaving Hamas to rebuild and fight another day, maybe some years from now, but nevertheless stay in power. The only way Hamas can win is by pressuring the Israeli government through Israeli public opinion, and likewise their supporters on the streets of Western capitals, going on demonstrations again this weekend, are trying to press Western governments to kind of save Hamas. What does a premature ceasefire mean? It doesn't mean there's going to be peace. Hamas are not going to suddenly, step down and declare a liberal democracy and give up power and so on. No,
Obviously not.
Obviously not. A ceasefire is in effect an end of war. That's what Hamas are looking for. And yes, Hamas are greatly battered, but they will, they'll still be there. And I also suggest that it will be a terrible thing worldwide, because it will send a message to Islamists, especially in the West, to say, look, if we can withstand the might of the Israeli army, and, Hezbollah couldn't, the Iranian nuclear program couldn't, well, Hamas are the Palestinian arm of the Muslim Brotherhood. There are Muslim Brotherhood wings in various Western capitals. They'll say, well, you know what, we're not going to have an uprising on October 7th in London or Paris or Canada or Australia, but slowly we will push Sharia law in Western capitals, and Allah is on our side, history is on our side. So again, going back to your hostages, of course it's agony for people to watch these, but I think Israel and the US and Western governments should be squeezing Qatar and Egypt for the reasons I mentioned, and not succumbing to Hamas psychological warfare.
Right. Well, in other news, let's speak of the latest developments in the UK. You're a British journalist. What are your thoughts on the new Home Secretary and the Foreign Minister appointed yesterday, especially in relation to their views on Israel?
Well, the new Home Secretary, which is like Interior Minister, is a Muslim lady, Mahmoud, but actually she has a relatively good record on Israel, relative, I say, compared to some of the other members of the Labour government and the outgoing Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, who were terrible on Israel and encouraged using a lot of fake news in Parliament about mass starvation and genocide and so on. So this government in Britain is not good, and it's being pressed. It's not good in and of itself, but it's also being pressured by two smaller left-wing parties, the Greens, and a new party set up by former Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn, that are, de facto pro-Hamas. They may not say they're pro-Hamas, but in effect they are. And Britain, along with other states, has spoken about recognizing a Palestinian state at the United Nations General Assembly later this month. It is, in my view, a mistake, not necessarily a mistake to aspire to some kind of future Palestinian independence or statehood, but it's clearly a mistake to do so unilaterally now in defiance of negotiations of the Oslo Treaty. Again, it encourages Hamas, and worse, from Britain's point of view, it encourages those hundreds of thousands, possibly millions, of Islamists and their left-wing supporters in Britain. It shows weakness. It shows that Western democracy, British democracy, is not on as firm grounds as it should be, and we see the same in Australia, in Canada, in France. The demonstrations like the one we saw yesterday, in which more than 400 pro-Palestinian demonstrators in London were arrested after violent clashes with the British police, those demonstrations ostensibly are about Palestine and Israel, but actually it's a political tool. The real agenda is to push for an overthrow of the system. When it comes to Islamists, they want Sharia. When it comes to the left, who are allied with them in a kind of unholy alliance, it's some kind of Marxist or post-Marxist agenda where they want to basically dismantle the system. And it's not an accident that some of the extreme climate change campaigners, like Greta Thunberg, presently en route on by...
We have to wrap up, Tom. I'm sorry.
Okay, good to be with you, Savannah.
But it's been really, really valuable input, and thank you very much for being with us, Tom Gross. We're looking forward for the next time.
Thank you.
That's it for this edition of ILTV on the Hour. We'll continue giving you the most important updates coming from Israel and the Middle East. I'm Sivan Raviv. This is ILTV News, and thank you very much for watching.